Good morning. Thank you for joining us today for the fourth in our panel discussion series, DEA, Who We Are and What We Do. I'm Lori Beatty, and I'm the director of the DEA Museum here at headquarters. Our panel today represents the DEA's Office of Diversion Control. For 45 years, the Drug Enforcement Administration, as a component of the U.S. Department of Justice, has been the federal government's greatest weapon in the fight against the diversion of legal drugs to the illicit market. Today, with the help of nearly 700 DEA diversion investigators, we continue to prevent the diversion of controlled substances and listed chemicals into the illicit market, while ensuring an adequate uninterrupted supply of pharmaceutical, controlled substances, and listed chemicals to meet the legitimate medical, commercial, and scientific needs of the market. DEA applies the vast range of individual talents, specialized training, and skills of our diversion investigators to the wide range of responsibilities in our vital mission. Today's three panelists come to us with decades of service, advancing the DEA mission. Staff Coordinator Justin Wood is a supervisory diversion investigator in the Pharmaceutical Investigations section. Mr. Wood provides operational support and case coordination for diversion groups and tactical diversion squads involved in fighting the opioid epidemic. Prior to assignment at headquarters, Mr. Wood was diversion group supervisor in Birmingham, Alabama. He supervised investigators who conducted civil, criminal, and regulatory cases on DEA registrants. Mr. Wood also served with DEA for over a decade in Nashville, Tennessee. He graduated from the Virginia Military Institute with a degree in chemistry and completed a Master's of Science degree from Penn State University. Joseph Brown is a staff coordinator for the headquarters Diversion Regulatory Group, coordinating investigations between main justice and field offices. He develops and maintains alliances with registrants, other key players regarding opiate education and regulatory issues. Mr. Brown's DEA career began at the New Jersey Division, Camden Resident Office, as a diversion investigator and later as a diversion group supervisor. During his 14 years there, he led outreach and education programs as well as investigations ensuring compliance with federal regulations. Mr. Brown received his BS in Mass Communications from Norfolk State University and his MSA in Administration from Central Michigan University, in addition to his career in the U.S. Army and Army Reserve. Donetta Spears began her employment with DEA in July of 1989. We have lots of seats down front. Come on down. She came on board at the Denver Diversion Office prior to entering Basic Diversion Investigator Class 18. On completion of training, Ms. Spears reported to the Seattle Division Office in September of 1989. Since then, she has held positions in Seattle, Oklahoma, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and at DEA headquarters here in Arlington, Virginia, where she currently serves as Executive Assistant for the Diversion Control Deputy Assistant Administrator. Ms. Spears holds a BS in Criminal Justice from Metropolitan State College and is currently working on her MS in Criminal Justice at St. Joseph's University. Our panel moderator today is Elizabeth Maurer, our Curator of Education at the DEA Museum. Today's panel will spend about 30 minutes or so discussing DEA's Office of Diversion Control, including their roles, training, and other topics. At the end, we will open the floor to questions, both from the in-person audience as well as those watching the live stream. If you are watching the live stream, please email your questions to the email address on the deamuseum.org homepage. We'll remind you of this address at the end of this presentation. Liz.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. We're so happy to see an audience here today, and hello to the people who are watching the live stream. This theme of the series this summer is who we are and what we do here at DEA. So far, we have talked to special agents, we've talked to the forensic chemists, we've talked to intelligence analysts, and we're so excited to finally have diversion up on stage with us. So I'm going to ask the same question I do every time, which is, tell us a little bit about what diversion control is responsible for here at DEA.
Well, we are responsible for ensuring drugs for medical purposes, scientific and research purposes, along with preventing diversion of pharmaceutical controlled substances.
And so could you define for us what we mean by diverting pharmaceutically controlled substances? What are they being diverted from?
So DEA regulates the industry in terms of controlled substances. Controlled substances are scheduled into different categories based on their abuse potential, addiction, and we in diversion control ensure that those drugs remain for legitimate use, as Danetta mentioned, for scientific research, medical use, but when they go outside the closed system of distribution, that's when we try to identify those issues and take action.
So you're making sure they stay in the pipeline from the point of origin to the person who's supposed to be receiving it for medical purposes.
That's correct.
And I think there's a lot of places along the pipeline where it can exit the system. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I would love to hear more about what you're doing currently within DEA, because I know there's a lot of different jobs within diversion control. So if we can start with Danetta.
My current position?
Yes, tell everyone what you do every day.
Every day I do a lot. I currently am the executive assistant for the Deputy Assistant Administrator in Diversion Control Regulatory, which means that particular position supports 4 sections within headquarters. It's our registration section, our quota section, our regulatory section, and I'm forgetting, let's see, what am I forgetting?
You say regulatory?
I did.
Yeah.
Right there.
I said registration. Import, I apologize, in import-export section. So when you're talking about the tracking of drugs, there's our import-export section. As Justin said, when we're talking about establishing how much pharmaceutical controlled substances are distributed out or manufactured, that's our quota section. As far as registration, I'm sure we'll speak about that further. They support all 1.8 million registrants in the country. And then our regulatory section, that section actually monitors and supports the field and regulatory investigations.
So that's a lot.
That's a lot.
So you're busy every day. Right?
Every day.
And you have a lot of coworkers, and we're going to find out from Justin, your colleague. Tell us about what your assignment is at DEA.
So I'm currently in week 3 of a new job. I'm the diversion program manager for the Washington Field Division. So I'm overseeing diversion operations for the states of Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia. But for the previous year, I've been serving at headquarters in the pharmaceutical investigations section at headquarters. And what we do is we help coordinate national cases. We also support the field in terms of being subject matter experts. We provide them with necessary tools, equipment, funding that they need to do their jobs. So we in headquarters, we're really a support mechanism for the agents, investigators, and analysts in the field who are doing pharmaceutical investigations.
Okay. All right. And Joe, tell us about your current assignment.
I'm currently assigned to the Diversion Regulatory Group, and in my group we handle around 10 different programs. We handle campus registrations, and that involves if a registrant wants to have the same business activity in more than one location on the campus, for instance, manufacturing, they have to request a campus registration. We also handle 303 investigations, and therefore bulk manufacturers and importers of controlled substance. And when they renew their registration or apply for a registration, it requires an investigation that's conducted by the field. We also do employment waivers. If someone wants to handle a registrant who's been convicted of a violation of the Controlled Substance Act, we have to do an investigation which is conducted by the field, and it'll be approved by the Deputy Assistant Administrator. We also handle the civil fines database, monitoring it. We also oversee scheduled investigations and just making sure that all the different paragraphs information provided. We also handle the regulatory investigations that are conducted on the work plan, and just to make sure they're completed in a timely manner. Basically provide oversight.
So you talked about registrations, and so registrations have to be made by registrants, and I think it would be really interesting if one of you could talk about who has to register and why they have to register.
Any company or person that handles pharmaceutical controlled substances are required to maintain a registration with DEA. So as mentioned earlier, we were talking about the closed system of distribution. So from the time a pharmaceutical controlled substance comes into the country through an importer who's registered, to a manufacturer who's registered, who manufactures those drugs, to a distributor who then distributes those drugs to pharmacies, hospitals, doctor's office, dentist's office, narcotic treatment programs, researchers, analytical labs. They all require a registration with us in order for us to track the flow of the pharmaceutical controlled substances. And then some of these manufacturers also will then export the products to other parts of the country, of the world, and they require an exporter registration as well, because then of course we're tracking that now they are leaving the United States.
So approximately how many registrants are there in the system?
Over 1.8 million.
Over 1.8 million
Yes.
different registrants.
Yes.
It's a lot of data. We'll talk about that in a couple minutes. And am I right that registration is tied to the drug schedules as well? In that, yes, right? So for everyone's edification, especially the people who are watching the live stream, can you tell us what the drug schedules are and how registration and the drug schedules interact?
Okay, Schedule 1 drugs are drugs that currently have no medical use and they have a high potential for abuse. And those are drugs like heroin and even marijuana, because federally it's illegal. Whereas Schedule 2 drugs are also drugs that have a high possibility of abuse, and they also, you can form physical addiction or mental addiction. And these are drugs like oxycodone and hydrocodone, morphine. Schedule 3 drugs have a moderate to low potential for abuse, and they're drugs like Xanax and Valium. Schedule 4 drugs are drugs that have a low potential for abuse, and I made a mistake. Schedule 3 drugs are drugs like testosterone and anabolic steroids, and Schedule 4 drugs like Xanax and Valium, and they have a low potential for abuse. And Schedule 5 drugs are very low potential for abuse, and we're talking drugs like anti-diarrhea medication and cough relief medication.
Okay. And so how does a person who registers, do they registering for certain parts of the schedule or the whole? Tell me about that.
So different types of registrants may have different authority. So most practitioners would have Schedule 2 through 5 authority so that they could handle all different types of medical needs, whether it's pain relief or different situations that might arise. But for example, manufacturers and distributors, they would indicate what schedules they want authority for, and based on the scheduling, there's different security requirements, different record keeping requirements based on the different schedules. So for example, a Schedule 2 drug has additional security requirements from a 3 through 5 drug because of its high potential for addiction and abuse.
So it seems to me that with 1.8 million registrants and a lot of different places within the closed cycle.
Closed system.
Closed system,
distribution.
thank you. And then people with different points, that there's a lot of data that you're working with. And so I am wondering about how DEA's diversion control, how you're using data to do your jobs.
Well, with regulating 1.8 million registrants, it's a very tall task. As mentioned when we started, we have approximately 700 diversion investigators. And so with that many registrants and that many distributions and transactions, there's a lot of dosage units and pills moving every day. Lots of prescriptions written by doctors, dispensed by pharmacies. And so we have to use available tools that we have to be more effective at our jobs. And so we have a database called ARCOS that allows us to track distributions of certain controlled substances, not all, and that helps us to keep an eye and make sure that drugs are not being diverted outside the closed system of distribution.
And you're doing this with only 700 diversion investigators within your division. So it seems to me that working with other entities and partnerships or in collaboration would be a really important part of how you're effective every day. So are some of you have experience, Joe, working in partnerships and in collaborations?
Well, currently I'm working in a joint relationship with the Consumer Protection Branch of Main Justice. And it consists of 2 DIs, a special agent, and a program analyst. Up until recently, it was Justin and I, along with Special Agent Higgins and Ghana Giles, program analyst. And what we're doing is working opiate cases. Consumer Protective Branch has a tool that we don't have in DEA. It's called injunctive relief. And it's very similar to our administrative process, ISO, in immediate suspension order. But the difference is when the Consumer Protective Branch, when they shut down a registrant, for example, a pharmacy, whereas we can take the DEA registrant, take their registration, they can also just take the pharmacy's license. So it's a nice relationship to have so that we can just increase our capabilities.
And to add to what Joe was saying, what we do on a daily basis in every field office involves partnerships. We work with the FBI, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Food and Drug Administration, but more often than those, we work with our state and local counterparts, the local police departments, the state police, because with a small number of diversion investigators nationwide, we have to partner with our state and local agencies in order to be more effective at our jobs, because there's diversion going on in small towns, big cities, and so it's important for us to identify problem areas through our partnerships with state and local and federal agencies.
Can I add anything?
Right, and then we also are global. So we do travel internationally, and we do meet with international governments regarding particular scheduling of drugs, regarding the trends in our country as opposed to the trends in their country, and what they're seeing as far as coming through their country and then coming into the United States that's illegal. So we're all over the globe.
You know, there's an old African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, you go alone. But if you want to go far, you go together. And that's why partnerships are so important. Because we go together, we can accomplish more.
And I know within DEA, you're also working, not in a silo, but you're working with other folks at DEA. So do you have any examples of how that can work too?
So in the field, when we're working with a case, we're obviously working with the special agents. We're working with our intelligence analysts that help build the case. We also have to work with our chemists closely, because as we obtain evidence and exhibits, those drug exhibits have to be analyzed, so the forensic chemists have an important role. And even our administrative and support staff is critical to what we do on a daily basis, because they help us provide the basic essentials from funding, support staff, our cars that we use, everything. Everybody has a role to play in this fight against drug diversion.
All right. So it's a team.
It's a team in the field, and it's a team in headquarters, yes.
So I'm always interested to know how someone decided that they wanted to go and be part of the team at DEA. And so I would love to hear your personal story about how you decided that this is what you wanted to be when you grew up.
This has been a joke here with us. I really don't have a story that says, wow, this is it for this was great for her. I actually, when I graduated from college, I wanted to go into court administration. And so sitting in a courtroom, assisting a judge, and running to the file room and looking at case files, I realized, I don't really think this is enough for me. I need a little bit more. And so I happened to go to a job fair and saw DEA's booth. And of course, all we know about is DEA special agents. And the recruiter there talked to me about diversion investigators. And that's my story, and I never look back.
And aren't you in part responsible for hiring diversion investigators now?
I am,
So
yes.
having looked at a lot of different applications, do you have any advice for people who might want to follow in your footsteps?
I do. First of all, credit is very important. A clean criminal record. Be careful with your employment history. Questionable employment history is a concern of ours. And of course, your drug use. Those 4 things I just listed is either a go or a no for you in this agency.
All right. So you're going to give a shout out to people who go to employment fairs to represent DEA to be recruiters, right? So that you're doing a great job, because look at who you've recruited in the past.
Yes, you guys are doing a great job. I actually worked a recruiting effort last summer, and it's a lot of work because you're selling our agency and you're explaining to them in detail what we do to get them excited. And that was the bright star for me when I was out there at that booth, that as I continued to explain our job, I could see how people became very excited by it. And from that, we did end up having people apply. So that was great.
See,
I
it is
enjoyed
great.
that.
Yeah. And now, Justin, you took a slightly different, not totally different, but somewhat different pathway to DEA. What's your story?
So I was a chemist, and I completed my Master of Science degree. I was in a joint program doing both engineering and then basic chemistry. And so I'd completed all the coursework for a PhD from Penn State University. And every day going to work, I didn't feel satisfaction. And after 9/11 happened, I started just thinking about ways that I could serve my country. And so I started looking at different jobs with federal governments, federal agencies, and I stumbled across the diversion investigator position on DEA's website. Like Danetta said, a lot of people don't know about diversion investigators. I had never heard of a diversion investigator. But when I read the job description and I looked at the background that the agency was looking for in pharmaceuticals and chemistry and science, along with other areas, I felt like I would be competitive. And it's been a great career. And I think the science background has helped me, because one of the things we do that we haven't really mentioned is we have everyday involvement with researchers throughout the country. Everywhere there's a research university. For example, I worked in Nashville, Tennessee, and Vanderbilt University is an academic medical center. So we deal with the researchers who are obtaining DEA numbers to be able to do what they do on a daily basis to develop cures for cancer and pain management and other areas. And I've always felt like with my science background, it was easier to talk with them at times with just some basic scientific knowledge, and so it's been helpful.
So it's good for DEA that you came with that background, and it strikes me, the more people I talk to in this series, is that people are coming from a wide variety of backgrounds, but often with the same end goal in mind, which is drug law enforcement for public health and safety reasons. Right? And I know that, Joe, this was not your first career, but
No.
I think you had that same mindset from what you've told me in the past, throughout both of your careers.
Yes, after graduating college, I was ROTC cadet, so I went into the Army as a second lieutenant. After 12 years, I transitioned to the Army Reserves, and I grew up in North Jersey in a neighborhood where we had a lot of people who overdosed on drugs, and a lot of them also, they died of AIDS from intravenous drug use, sharing needles. So I wanted to join DEA to do my part in the war against drugs. So that's why I came on board.
But before DEA, you were active duty, weren't you?
I was 12 years active duty United States Army, and after I went into the reserves, I continued my military career. Did a couple of tours in Afghanistan, Horn of Africa after 9/11 with the Army. But DEA allowed me to maintain military career and a DEA career.
Right. So you've seen around the world and from a couple different perspectives.
Yes, I've been deployed 5 times after 9/11 with the Army, but I still was employed by DEA.
So if you were any of you going to offer advice to somebody about like why this is a great career, like what would you tell them?
Well, if you like, you can see the world. You have the opportunity to travel. DEA has programs to pay for your education if you want to continue your education.
I think it really offers you a unique opportunity to do something different every day. You may be in the boardroom of a major pharmaceutical company on Monday, and you may be in Tuesday in a police department, and Wednesday you could be testifying in court. So it's really unique in that you can do so many different things, both criminally and regulatory, to do so many different things.
And I guess for me, it's protecting our country. And that's, I'm prideful of that. That each day I walk through these doors, I know that we're here to protect our country and to save lives. And that's important.
It's very important, and I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to read aloud to everyone the mission of the Office of Diversion Control, which is to prevent, detect, and investigate the diversion of controlled pharmaceuticals and listed chemicals from legitimate sources while ensuring an adequate and uninterrupted supply for legitimate medical, commercial, and scientific needs. And so I'm going to have a big question. Why is that important to our society and to our country?
Well, I gave my answer.
Yeah.
It's saving lives.
It's saving lives.
It's protecting our country. It's protecting our children. It's protecting our parents. You know, it's a prideful job that is protecting American citizens.
It's also education, educating kids and the public on about drug use. That's why we have our 360 program also. That has enforcement, diversion control, and community outreach. And the community outreach portion is when we educate the community, kids in high school, really middle school is what we concentrate on. And also educating registrants, doctors on how to prescribe controlled substance, over-prescribing, registrants on the due diligence.
I think when people in the public tend to think about diverted pharmaceuticals, that what comes to mind first and foremost is opioids. And I think because it's in the news a lot, but are opioids the only thing that you're looking at, or do you see other threats that are on the horizon for diverted pharmaceuticals?
So we're going to look at all controlled substances, and there are other drugs besides your opioids that are a threat. We're seeing more and more abuse of amphetamines. We're seeing it with high school and college age kids. They're being prescribed that to be able to focus more and study more. But in many instances, they're being used inappropriately and sold on the streets. We also see a lot of abuse potential with benzodiazepines like Valium and Xanax. Those are highly abused as well.
Yeah, I personally know of parents who have allowed their kids, taking their kids to the doctor so they could be prescribed amphetamines to help them study, to make them more competitive.
So it seems that the education component is really important to help people understand that there's a reason why things are prescribed, and that the problem is ongoing, but that it is important that you are here to address it on a daily basis. Right? And I see that we have gotten to the end of our time, and I would love to open up the floor now to questions. If anyone on the live stream has a question, if you could navigate to deamuseum.org's homepage, where you will find an email address to which you can send a question, and we'll receive that here in the audience and ask it. For those of you who are in the audience, we have folks on either side with microphones, and if you could raise your hand and they'll give you a microphone, and please use the microphone so that people who are watching the live stream can hear your question. And I see we have one over here, and then we'll come
Yeah, just
next.
a quick question. I wanted to know if veterinary drugs are within the scope of your activities.
Veterinary drugs.
Yes, sir. That is a profession that handles controlled substances, and we deal with veterinarians on a daily basis. And depending on what office you're in, you may deal with them more often. When I worked in Tennessee, there was a big equine population, horses, and so we dealt with veterinarians that specifically dealt with the Tennessee walking horses. And if you're in farm country, you deal with a lot of veterinarians as well.
Do we have another question?
We have an online question. They say that campus registrations were mentioned. Does that mean a university could maintain a single registration such that researchers within the university that study the drugs of abuse would not need to obtain their own personal registration?
Yeah, campus registration means that for any business activity, like researchers, if it's on the campus, they can have one registration to cover all the buildings, yes. But it has to be for that business activity. It cannot be one campus registration to cover researching plus manufacturing. It would only be for researchers.
And so in this case, so I think our person with the question assumed campus meant university, and it could mean university, but it more broadly means...
It means any company that has a campus, their campus, not a college campus. Okay. It can be a college campus, but it's just a campus for a registrant.
Okay.
In the university setting, in my experience, most of the individual principal investigators or researchers maintain their own DA number that is affiliated with an FDA-approved research project, and then they're held responsible for obtaining and then storing and maintaining the security of those drugs for that specific project. So for example, at a university, you may have hundreds of different researchers who have specific projects tied to specific controlled substances.
Okay.
So it's a complex question to answer in this setting, but I would recommend that the person with the question contact their local DEA field office, ask to speak to a diversion investigator, where we could spend more time appropriately answering that question.
Right. Also, before we approve a campus registration, we contact the local field office, and they have to go out and do an investigation to make sure it meets the requirements of the CFR.
Okay. So there's a process.
Yes.
All right.
And it's always better to call and ask for advice from a diversion investigator.
Yes. All right. But that was a good question. I think it opened up a lot of interesting pathways.
Hi, thank you for having this event here. It's my understanding that a lot of the opioid overdoses that we're seeing, you're not running down to CVS and picking up that prescription. It's due to the fentanyl that they're lacing the drugs with first. And it's and I kind of have the second question as well, is we've seen Big Pharma do things to get people addicted to certain drugs. You can get a prescription for Vicodin for like $10 a month. Do you feel that there's a chance that Big Pharma may be pushing this crisis, knowing that they're going to have to come out with a new drug, which will now make it much more expensive for patients and insurance companies to actually cover legitimate pain after surgeries and broken bones and things of that nature.
Well, to answer the first part of that question, it's clear to us that fentanyl is a huge problem, as we're seeing heroin and other drugs laced with fentanyl. But we also have to recognize that pharmaceutical opioids are a problem and do cause overdoses as well. But it's clear that fentanyl has caused an increase in those overdose deaths. So it's sort of a two-pronged approach. We need our enforcement agents to investigate the illicit clandestine drugs, and then we as diversion investigators cover the pharmaceutical drugs. So it's important to look at both sides of that, because in my experience we have seen many people who have died from pharmaceutical opioids.
And is it because they're taking too many of them, or what is, it's reacting badly with their...
Well, there's many different scenarios that we could discuss. It's important to remember that these scheduled drugs do have a legitimate medical purpose. I mean, we've all been patients. We're going to be patients in the future. Our family members will be patients. So it's important to remember these drugs have a legitimate medical use, but it's important to use them as prescribed for a legitimate medical need. One of the things that has been a concern for years is that when someone receives a prescription, it remains in our drawers, our medicine cabinets for too long, and then people who don't have a need for those drugs can obtain them. And that's why DEA does an event called the National Drug Take-Back Initiative. It's twice a year, fall and spring, where we encourage citizens to look in their homes and find those pharmaceutical drugs that they don't need anymore, get them out of the potential hands of our children and loved ones where they could be misused.
So clean out the medicine cabinets.
Yes.
On a regular basis. Right.
And on the second part, which is really what I was more concerned about, Big Pharma being investigated and looking into possibly, I know we've had a couple lawsuits on this recently that they were held accountable for this, but is this something that you guys are actively pursuing?
Well, I think our agency is actively pursuing drug diversion investigations every day. It could be the pharmacy down the street that drugs are being diverted out the back door. It could be a practitioner inappropriately prescribing, or it could be a drug distributor or manufacturer. We look at all potential signs of diversion because there's many, and so where the diversion occurs, we're going to investigate it, whether it's big pharma or small town doctor pharmacists. We're going to look at it all.
We're looking at it all. We're not attacking one specific category of a registrant.
Two-part question. The first part follows up on a previous question that the topic of fentanyl came up, and we hear in the news fentanyl a lot lately, and in fact we've heard that DEA did something called emergency scheduling of fentanyl and maybe its analog. So if you could, first part of the question is, can you talk about what is emergency scheduling? What does that mean? And what did DEA do with fentanyl? And then the second part of the question is much more broad, and what has changed in the Office of Diversion Control in the years since the President declared the opioid public health crisis? Thank you.
So emergency scheduling, what we do is we conduct studies and research to determine if a particular drug that is not controlled is causing deaths or severe injuries to human beings. And based on the information that we receive, we determine if we should schedule the drug. We also collaborate with FDA to do that. And based on the information and the results that we receive and the information that FDA receives, the determination is then decided that yes, we will schedule it. And because of the number of deaths that are occurring, it is important to schedule it immediately.
And then the second part of the question was about fentanyl.
Well, I think the question was more of what are we doing as far as diversion. So I will say, based on the president's determination, there was an opioid epidemic. In pharmaceutical controlled substances, the prescriptions for opioids have decreased. So our outreach programs, I believe, have really been beneficial, along with the work of our diversion investigators and other DEA personnel.
Any more questions from the audience or from the...
Hello. You mentioned the medication cabinet cleanout that you guys hold twice a year. I work that, and I get a few questions whenever people come in. One of them is, what do you guys do with the medications? And then the other question is why you guys don't collect needles, because we have tons of people bringing in needles. So those are the two questions.
So what happens to the collected medications, and why are we not collecting needles?
We destroyed the collected medication.
Okay.
And the needles, I'm assuming that we're the DEA, drug enforcement. So we're concerned with controlled substance. And I know needles are a tool utilized in taking controlled substance, but I just don't think it's something we collect for that reason, not being a controlled substance.
Plus, we have to be concerned with the safety of our personnel when they're collecting these drugs. And of course, the concern would be a needle puncturing skin.
Yeah. Usually it's an EpiPen that they ask about that has the medication, but it has a needle in it.
Okay, and then the other thing is, last he said that we incinerate. And I will say that we collect in a process. We don't, of course, look what is in the boxes that we collect, but we make sure that there's a process of receipt of those drugs. We secure those drugs until we incinerate. And a lot of our incinerating companies, based on our need, their burn cycle is not accepting a lot of those type of needles and EpiPens.
And I've seen people bring EpiPens in. It's a little bit different situation than just like a pure needle, because EpiPens are often in those plastic containers. I've got a daughter who has to carry an EpiPen, so I'm very familiar with them. And they do expire frequently, and so they do accumulate around the house, but they're in a safer, very hard plastic type container. And when we participate in the drug take back, we don't ask questions. There's a lot of concerns from the public about my privacy. Are you going to look at these labels? And so many people bring a plastic bag and just drop it in. So there's a very good chance that there's EpiPens in those containers. And I think those are probably safe to dispose versus us collecting, needles for injection.
So we have a question from the streaming audience.
Okay, the question is, does DEA do inspections on compounding pharmacies, and in parentheses they say bioidentical hormones, etc., or is that in the jurisdiction of the FDA?
If it's a scheduled drug, yes, we do inspect them, but it isn't routine. Our inspections of any registrant, particularly a pharmacy, would be if there is a need based on a complaint. But if it is a non-controlled substance, we don't conduct any inspection of that particular drug.
Just to add to that, as mentioned earlier, partnerships are very important. And so many times our state boards of pharmacy do conduct inspections of compounding pharmacies that they regulate. And so if they ask us to participate in the event that there are controlled substances involved, we would absolutely help our counterparts in the Board of Pharmacy. But like Danetta said, if it's a non-controlled substance and they don't have a DEA number, we wouldn't necessarily have authority to go in there to inspect them as a non-registrant.
Okay. All right. We have time for one more question.
So this question is from a forensic scientist in a police department, And their question is, we have seen kratom pretty regularly in casework here. I was wondering if there have been any recent trends elsewhere regarding, oh my gosh, I can't say this word. Well, we'll skip that. Or plans to schedule the drug. I know it was...
Mitragynine.
Mitragynine.
There we go. So are there plans to schedule it?
Schedule kratom.
Kratom?
Yes.
We are looking at possibly scheduling kratom. I'm sure, as you know, there was a notice publicized regarding our intent. We did pull that back in order to perform additional research and allow the public to comment. And so we are now working in collaboration with FDA to make a final determination as to what we're going to do with kratom.
All right. Well, we had some good questions from the audience today. You all are very impressive audience members, right? And I want to thank Danetta and Justin and Joe for joining us today and sharing your expertise about diversion control. I thought it was wonderful, and I'm looking forward to watching it again afterwards. And so that you all know, it will be on deamuseum.org's website forever. So if anyone would like to come and watch it again, that's open to you, right? Like I said, this is the 4th that we've had this year. We're looking forward to sometime in September featuring DEA's professional and technical staff members. So please come back and join us again. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. Okay. Now you can turn off your microphone.